Hi, I'm Ruben Saltzman with Structure Tech Home Inspections, and today I'm going to share with you a big list of home inspector terms, and I'm going to explain to you what your home inspector is really trying to say. Yeah, so if you get a home inspection, your home inspector is going to use all these different terms, and they'll probably do a pretty good job of explaining all of it, but when we talk about this stuff day in and day out, sometimes it's easy for us home inspectors to forget that some of these terms that become just everyday language for us isn't everyday language for the layperson. So I'm going to go over all the terms that I thought we use most commonly, and I'll explain what the home inspector is really talking about. I'd say number 1, 2, and 3 is this term called deferred maintenance. When a home inspector talks about deferred maintenance, we're saying the previous owners ain't done nothing with their house. It means that there's maintenance that should have been done that they just didn't do. Deferred maintenance is a euphemism. It's a nice way of saying that the previous owners haven't done stuff that they should have been doing over the years. And when your home inspector says this frequently, when they frequently talk about deferred maintenance, it should tell you that you're buying a house that has been kind of neglected. It's not a good thing to hear during a home inspection. So that's deferred maintenance. Number 2, clean. When a home inspector talks about a clean house or a clean home inspection, we're not saying that the house has been thoroughly mopped, wiped, and dusted, and vacuumed, and wiped down. We're saying that it's in good condition. It means we're not finding a lot of stuff wrong. It means that people have maintained it properly. Stuff that was old has been replaced. Safety upgrades have been taken care of. That's a good thing to hear. But we're not talking about sanitation. And another one on that same vein would be, and maybe this is just mine, maybe other home inspectors don't say this, but I used to joke with my clients, if I found a really clean house, I'd say this is a boring inspection. It means that I'm not coming up with a lot of stuff that's wrong. It means it's an extremely clean house. That's definitely a good thing to hear. If your home inspector jokes with you about this being a very boring inspection, that's a good thing. Next would be grading. This refers to the pitch of the ground around the outside of the house. You want the ground to slope away from your house, and we will frequently use these terms pitch of the ground and grading interchangeably. If we talk about negative grade, it means that the ground slopes towards the house. That's a negative thing. If we talk about positive grade, it means how the ground slopes away. That is a positive thing. So that's grading. And just about every home inspector is going to end up talking about that at some point during the home inspection. Next, we've got end of life expectancy. Now, I just talked about this one last week. In fact, I was writing this blog post about all these home inspector terms, and I decided that end of life expectancy needs its very own topic. When a home inspector tells you something is at the end of its life expectancy, we're using general life expectancies. It's not going to be anything specific to what we're actually looking at. I wouldn't put a ton of stock in that one. But go back and watch last week's video or read last week's blog post for more information on that one. Next, we've got GFIs or GFCI devices, however you want to say it. It's one of these little guys. It's a life safety device. These have been around for maybe about 50 years or so. Home inspectors will often recommend having these things added in a bunch of areas where people are more prone to getting electrocuted. They cost about 15 bucks. It's not that big of a deal to put them in. And the two terms, GFI and GFCI, they're used interchangeably. GFI is kind of an older term. GFCI stands for ground fault circuit interrupter. It's a more modern term. But personally, I'm guilty of using the two terms interchangeably. At any rate, when a home inspector is bringing up something like a GFI, that brings us to our next term, which is safety upgrade. That's something home inspectors will use to describe a lot of the recommendations we're making, because we're saying that even though we're making a recommendation to put in, say, GFI devices, there's not necessarily anything wrong with the house. Maybe the house was built in 1950 before these devices ever existed, and it's not a defect if you don't have these things in your kitchen, but it would be a nice upgrade to put some of these in to make the house a little bit safer. It's to distinguish the difference between something that's just plain wrong or improper versus there's something you could do to make it safer. So that's a safety upgrade. Next, we've got the terms black stains or suspected microbial growth. When a home inspector uses these terms, just about every time we're referring to mold. But we don't want to paint ourselves into a corner. If I go in an attic and I see all these stains up there and I just say, yeah, it's mold, there's a chance I could be wrong. Not only that, I've had situations where mortgage companies denied the mortgage on a house because I had the word mold in my reports. So I'm careful to not use that term in my inspection reports. I usually don't even say the word during home inspections. I might say, it looks like mold, but I'm never gonna paint myself into a corner. I used to do that, I don't do it anymore. So when you hear black stains, things like that, your home inspector thinks they found mold, but they don't wanna get caught being wrong. That's what that means. Next, HVAC. This is an acronym, it's HVAC, and it means heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. It's a trade professional. It's the person who's going to handle the air moving around in your house. When we say get an HVAC contractor, it's a professional who's going to deal with one of these things. Next one is crawl spaces. And for this, I've got a reference because crawl spaces actually used to be defined in the Minnesota State Residential Code. I've got this old code book here. This is from 2003. It's fallen apart on me. But we used to define crawl space, and it was defined as areas or rooms with less than 7 feet ceiling height measured from the finished floor or grade below. That was the Minnesota definition. There was no national definition of a crawl space, but that's what we called it in Minnesota. We don't define it anymore. I don't know why. It's no longer in the code book, but I'd say what a crawl space really, here's part of the reason we don't put it in the code book anymore. We changed the minimum ceiling height in an unfinished basement. If you want to change it over to a finished bedroom or something, we said you can actually go down to 6'8". I think that was the time that we removed the definition from our code. At any rate, I'm on a tangent now. A crawl space is going to be the space between the ground, the lowest level of the house, and the ceiling above it, but it's not going to be tall enough to actually consider it finished space. So it's always going to be the lowest area. And I bring up this distinction because I've had many clients refer to the attic space as the crawl space. They think because you're crawling through there, it's a crawl space. No, that is not a crawl space. That is your attic. The crawl space is always at the lowest level of the house. So, got to make that clear. Next, we got R value. This refers to the insulating value of insulation. The R stands for resistance. It means the resistance to heat flow. The higher the R value, the better. If we're shooting in Minnesota, we're shooting for a number somewhere close to 50. That's good for a nice new home in an attic. If you got an older house, you're certainly not going to have that. Your home inspector might recommend an energy upgrade, adding some more, but that's just what you got. It's not like it's going to be a defect for an older house. And then we've got efflorescence. This refers to fuzzy salt crystals that get deposited usually on basement walls, and they indicate that you've had some water pressure against a wall. It's evidence that you've had some water that wanted to get into the house. It doesn't mean that you have water coming in now. It doesn't mean that you ever will have water in the future. It's just a clue to tell you there's a little bit of water drive in a particular area. And it's these fuzzy salt crystals, not to be confused with effervescence. I've heard people mispronounce the word that way many times. And then finally, last one on our list is flashing. It's a material that keeps water from leaking into the house. It's usually made out of metal. It doesn't cost a lot of money. It's cheap stuff. Doesn't cost a lot of money to install. But whoever's putting it in needs to know what they're doing, and it needs to be done properly. When it's not done properly, it can lead to major water intrusion problems, very expensive stuff. Think of the old poem or the old saying, for want of a nail. It's a little bit like that. Okay, that is all the terms I could think of that home inspectors frequently use. If I sat for another hour, maybe I'd come up with one or two more, but these are the most common ones. Hope this gives you a little bit of insight into what the home inspector is really trying to say. Hope this helps to decode some of these terms. Again, I'm Ruben Saltzman with Structure Tech Home Inspections. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.